Now, what I like to do, I like to ask people, raise your hand. We have people with the mics. We have a couple of people who have microphones. They'll come to you, ask your question. You can direct it either to me or to one of our commissioners, or just an open question and we'll figure out who should answer.
On January 31st, Councilman Murtaugh and Councilwoman Barbado sponsored a meeting here. It was a presentation by a representative of the Capelli organization on the urban development in downtown Yonkers. At the end of the meeting, the representative of the Capelli organization gave an analysis of the increased tax revenues, which amounted to about $13 million a year, $8 million of which came from real estate taxes. He then said it's going to cost $200 million in urban infrastructure improvement to be paid for by the city in order to make this happen. He said not to worry, there's a mechanism to pay for this. It's been used in other states, where you dedicate a half or two-thirds of the increase in the real estate taxes to pay off the bonds for the infrastructure. I asked him how long it was going to take, and he said he didn't know, but the city could issue AAA bonds at 4% and pay it off. In thinking about it afterwards, if the interest on $200 million at 4% is $8 million a year, which is the proposed projected increase in the real estate tax from this development. If only the principal we're going to pay down at $8 million a year would take 25 years. And I think it's highly unlikely that a 25-year bond issued by the city of Yonkers is going to come out at 4%. So how is this going to be paid for? And is there going to be, in fact, a negative impact on the amount of real estate tax return?
Yeah, good question. First of all, those are their numbers. Those were the developer's presentation. That was their numbers. We don't necessarily, in fact, I can tell you we don't agree with their assessment that it's a $200 million build-out. In very brief description, the downtown, infrastructure of the downtown is, as you know, and I'm sure most of you know, is very old, and in some cases over 100 years old. It can't support any real major development now. We have combined sewers down there that every time there's a heavy storm discharge a significant amount of raw sewage into the Hudson River. That's also something that's got to be corrected, but it requires an enormous amount of money to do that. So the infrastructure's got to be rebuilt if we want any real development down there. We don't have, and we're certainly not inclined, I don't think I can get any of the council members to agree, whether it's $100 or $200 million or anything in between, to go out and bond for that kind of money to rebuild our infrastructure and then hope that that attracts new development in and new businesses to come in. But there is a mechanism, and it's called a TIF, T-I-F, and it's tax increment financing. And you will be learning a great deal more because they'll be presenting this information. We're going to have them actually put together a show to put on Channel 78 to explain it. There will be public hearing, and ultimately the final arbiter is the city. The city decides whether we want to or do not want to go into this kind of tax increment financing to finance the infrastructure which will allow this development to happen. Under the assumption, and it's a legitimate assumption, that we don't have the infrastructure to do more than some minor development in the downtown, certainly not the major development that's being proposed, it has to be rebuilt. Now there are ways to rebuild it. The way they're proposing is something called tax increment financing, which is this. Right now you got, let's assume you're getting, most of this land is publicly owned land, so we get no tax dollars from that land. We have the Chicken Island parking lot, the Larkin Plaza parking lot, street beds, the land that's next to the Decay Center. So it really doesn't generate any tax dollars for the city. We're just using simple round numbers. If when they finish their development, it now generates $1,000 in taxes, that's $1,000 more than we were getting. So what we would do is, after studying and getting full confirmation of, number one, what has to be built, number two, what is our responsibility to build, because it's the city's infrastructure being rebuilt, what is the developer's responsibility to pay for, because it's going to support only their development for the increase to fund their development. And what happens is, we decide after going through that, what percentage of that $1,000 has to go to pay down the bonds that will be floated to pay for this new construction. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, we don't know. They've said $200 million, 75%. I'm not inclined to agree with that, because I've seen some things that I already disagree with, but we're getting experts in on the side of the city to analyze that for us. What happens is, let's say it's 70%. That 70% of that $1,000, $700, goes every year to pay the bonds off that rebuilds that infrastructure. And it's a lot more, obviously, than the cost of it, just as your mortgage is a lot more than the purchase price of your house. But we get the remaining 30%, plus we get all of the income tax, we get all of the sales tax, and we get all of the real estate transfer tax money. If they don't generate enough in property taxes, and that will be determined by our assessor, who will assess the properties for their value. If they don't generate enough money, they have to pick up the difference. They cannot take any of our sales tax or the other tax money. So the jury is still out whether or not a tax increment financing plan to build this infrastructure to allow this development to happen is going to work. They've got to study it. We're one of only a few cities in the state of New York that can even employ this, and that's because we have a school district that's dependent on the city for its money. Because this tax increment financing, we've been told, cannot go into tax dollars that are exclusively for the schools where there's separate taxing districts. So all you have is the municipal side and a property value that supports it, and our property values are high. So chances are only the large cities, and Yonkers may be the only one, as would New York City, are the only ones that can do it right now, because the other three don't have the property value. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, and some of the other cities actually don't have the property values that have increased that will support this kind of financing. It has been done all over the United States. I understand the city of Chicago's got 100 of them, or more than 100 of them. Baltimore's got many of them. All these tax districts, these tax increment financing districts, have been used to support the development that's gone on there. So the numbers they gave you are their numbers. I'm certainly not accepting them. I guarantee you our city council is certainly not accepting them at face value. The analysis has to be done by them. It will then be analyzed again by our consultants, and it will be subject of hearings and questions. And when it's all done, either the city, and that includes me as mayor, and the city council, who ultimately would have to approve the tax increment financing and then send it to the state, will have to say it makes sense to do it or it doesn't make sense to do it. If it makes sense to do it, then it's because it will pay for us to do it. We will get an enormous number of jobs, all kinds of new places to live and places to shop and businesses, as well as revenues coming into the city that make it worth our while to do it. And if not, it doesn't happen, that means that this development goes away. They will not build, because they can't afford to build and also build all this new infrastructure. So it's a balancing act. We're going to find out over the coming months whether or not they really can prove to the city that it works for them and works for the city, and if it does, then hopefully the city council approves it and we move forward. If it doesn't, we're back to the drawing board on the rebuilding of the downtown. Yes?
My question is about signs. There's a sign near my house on Bayberry Street between Brunswick Road and Chatfield Road. Okay. All the buses turn, because it's a one-way street on Chatfield, to turn into Bayberry to get on Brunswick Road.
These are school buses or?
School buses, yeah, and every single car also that is picked up or left from there. And the sign on one side of the street is no parking. Now, when there's a school event, cars park there. And I have seen DPW trucks and police cars, and I've mentioned about the parking there. There's no parking sign, and I've been told that sign is just too faded. We can't enforce it. Also, the street between Brunswick Road and Chapel Road on the north side never, and I mean that, never gets cleaned.
All right, you're talking about plowing or street sweeping or both?
Just street sweeping.
Okay.
And I'll tell